Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life. Whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. We are smack dab in the middle of the Christmas season. It's a time of year that's supposed to be all about joy and giving, but for many people, it's a lot more complicated than that. So what do you do if Christmas is a challenging time for you, whether it's because of busyness or pressure or relationships or 1,000 different reasons? Christmas may not be what you wish it was. So 2 quick things that we've put together. There's some resources. One is that we have some resources to help you through this season. We'd love to send you those. Just check out the show notes to get them. Second, last Christmas, one of the pastors of the Ridge, Brodie, Swanson, and I talked about a lot of these topics and more. So this is my conversation with Brodie. You mentioned there have definitely been times where you're like, I just wish it was January.
Yeah.
If somebody's in that season right now and they're like, gosh, another Christmas season, or is there any, I don't know if it's an encouragement or if it's like a, hey, this is what was helpful for me or something like that to get to a place where, I don't know, maybe it's the season's a little bit easier.
Yeah. I think there are seasons in our life depending. I mean, I went to the auto mechanic the other day, had to stop in, and he suddenly just tells me his story. I'm just standing there and he's behind the counter and he's like, yeah, my dad died on Christmas Eve and now the season is really hard. And I was like, wow, I don't know you, but I appreciate you telling me that. But
Yeah.
The reality is that there's a lot of that kind of stuff for a lot of people. And sometimes for a few years, maybe just a year, maybe more than that, you just have to muddle your way through. And you have to be able to say, how do I give myself the grace not to be happy and excited and joyous, knowing that maybe sometime in the future, I'll be able to do this different. There's some of us who, you know, we go in with expectations then and say, okay, I'm supposed to be happy and I'm supposed to be excited, but that's not really where I'm at internally. And so I just want to turn it all off. And I guess what I'd encourage somebody to do with that is find life-giving people and let the season be about being with those life-giving people periodically, so that even though you can't manufacture that joy and stuff inside of you, that maybe you can find some peace and some uplifting moments and some positivity. And I mean, I know in my job I'm supposed to say this, but when you, I honestly believe it, is that when you say, God, I'm not sure what to do with this season, can you help me? I think he listens and I think he answers. And so part of being in a difficult space where you just wish you could skip it all is figuring out, hey, is this just this year or is this me permanently? And where does God play into that in a conversation, knowing he's not going to have some super audible voice out of heaven, but in that still small voice and through things around us, he can change that season for us from being one that we dread to maybe one that we can find some positivity in.
Man, that is the most like succinct, like 3 or 4 point like section of answer. Like that was incredible. Like you're like, cause you touched on so many good things like that are so helpful and so practical, right? Like one, acknowledge it's okay. Like, hey, you know what? This is the reality of the situation. I'm not super chipper right now.
Yeah.
Like this is a hard time and that's okay. And not feeling like you have to be like, oh, it's Christmas, so I have to be like fake joy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got like this painted on smile, but the eyes are like dead inside. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's too dark right there.
I wasn't going to go down there with you,
right,
but okay.
Yeah. And then acknowledging, and then like, but not doing that alone. You know, making sure that there are people in your life that, and that may even be its own challenge for some people, right? But, but being around people and not, I think part of that is like people can sometimes feel like they're a burden when they're in that type of thing. And I think it's like, that's friendship and that's community and that's family to some extent. Hopefully your family's in that situation, but And involving God. I mean, you're right. That is our answer, right? We gotta say, but it's like, there's a reason why we say it, and that's because we've experienced it to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one added aspect of this that we're not touching on is if you're a parent of young kids and you feel that, like you said, dead inside, it's a whole different ballgame. And you just need to find people to surround yourself with, maybe families that can help prop up during the season. Just being honest about that, because that's a whole other thing, trying to be happy for kids that you want to be happy because maybe their life isn't great, but you're trying not to be disingenuous to yourself. And I think that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, now we have an next 4 podcast topics.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. So, away from the like kind of, I'll call it blue Christmas mentality, right? And like the blue Christmas feeling is the, like just the chaos and the busyness that is Christmas time, the holidays, even I would say up until maybe the second or third day, especially if you have a family, of January, right? Where maybe your kids get back into school and stuff like that. I mean, busy seasons, and we can talk about it in generally before we even go specific into the holidays. Like busy seasons can be really challenging. I don't think that's a shocking statement to anybody that's listening. They're like, oh, wow.
That's profound.
You know what I heard on this podcast today? Busy seasons are challenging. Is when you think about that, and when you think about the like busy seasons of your life, is there any overall like themes or concerns or things you're like, wow, I really wish I had been more this, or I would encourage people to be cautious of this when they were about to go into a busy season or they were in one?
I think the first thing is to make sure that it's a season. Because some people say, hey, I'm in a busy season. And then next month they say the same thing. And the next month they say the same thing. And really what they have is an overprogrammed life. And so to sit back and be honest about, is this a busy season? And if I know that busy season is coming, can I get ahead of it so that we know during that season, here's how it's going to affect my life. Here's how it's going to affect the people around me, whether it's family or friends. And then when is it going to end? Or is there not an end to it? And I think that's the first thing that I look at, is to go, okay, I have a lot of people in my life that say they have a busy season and really they just have a busy life all the time. And
how can you tell the difference? Is there anything because for some people it may be just the norm, right? Where they're like, oh, that's just life. Life is just, 10-hour days and then busy afternoons,
How do you tell the difference? That's a great question. I don't know that I have a great answer for it, but here's some of the telltale signs for me, especially when it's when we have friends and we're like, hey, when do we want to get together? Well, this is a busy season for us right now. And then we look at January and, oh, we've got all this. Let's look at February. And pretty soon you're 6 months out, it's a busy life. And I think when it's constantly, you're feeling like somebody's rolling in late and leaving early and the brain space isn't there, then it doesn't make them a bad person. It just calls into question whether they're being intentional with their life or if their life is running them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. Tweet that. Can you still say tweet that, or is it now? Is it still? Do you still tweet on X? I don't know.
I don't know. I'll leave that to you. You're the expert.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I'll wade through those waters. Man, shouldn't have gone off on that train. That derailed my thought and my question.
That's okay.
Yeah. No, it's fine. So how do you man, you just said that one-liner. Do you remember your one-liner?
Oh, whether you're being intentional with the season or whether your life is running you.
Thank you. Okay, so you say intentional with your season, right? What does that mean?
So can I just take that December to January 3rd or 4th season and just kind of use it as an example? I think that when I look at that season coming up, first of all, I know that when you're in a church world, that's going to be a busy season between Thanksgiving and maybe even the middle of January. And so the question that we have to ask is, what kind of life do we want to live in the busy season? And we've had to, this will be just a phrase, but it's not whatever it, we tried to reimagine what Christmas looks like at our house and say, okay, when I was growing up, it was all the school programs, which thankfully school districts have gotten smart and they're starting to put them in January. And what about all of the dinners that you get invited to and the parties that you're going to get invited to? And we've started to say, okay, let's start with what we want life to look like. And then we're going to have to say no to a number of things. And probably the ones that are nice to go to because they're nice things, and say no to those, like the nice company Christmas dinner that they're probably going to put filet mignon on your plate and you're going to feel really good about it. And we say no to that for the sake that we want to say yes to, hey, the families in our neighborhood are having a get together with a white elephant and the kids are going to be running around and they're absolutely insane, but we want to be part of that. And so it's figuring out what is it that we think is important and trying to make sure that we have room to say yes to that, which means that we're going to have to say no to some other things. That makes sense?
Totally. I think that's super powerful. I think that saying no is challenging when you have free space, right? Because we just like, oh, I can, you know what I mean? But does that mean you should, you know?
That is the question. I mean, we all have the ability to do almost anything we want within boundaries, but what's best is often the harder question.
Yeah. Okay. So what was helpful? Like you're talking about like reimagining Christmas with your family.
Yeah.
What type of, like, what was that process like? Was that just like, oh, I'm going to dream and jot it down on a notepad? I'm just like, actually, I've seen the movies and this is what the movies look like. And so I want that. Like, what did that look like?
Well, it looks a lot of like the adults in the room are saying, we can't do Christmas like this again. And the kids in the room saying, oh, we want to do everything. And finally saying, hey, what's important to us? And then without having a family meeting and voting on anything, trying to listen to what's important to the kids too, and trying to see how much can we fit and what are we going to do? And it goes back to not only planning schedule, but it's also, hey, what about our finances? What do we have the ability to spend that's not going to make us live with regret in January? It's just getting really intentional with that whole season and trying to be as transparent as possible with that. And so we first had to make the decision that we wanted Christmas to be something different. And then we started to say, how could we do that in a way that we could replicate, that it just wasn't up for grabs every year? And so we have certain traditions that we do that help keep us grounded, that, hey, Christmas is here. And no, it's not going to kill us, but there's some special things that recognize the uniqueness of individuals and what they like and what they don't like, and including a little bit of surprise and things and fun. And then we have rhythms to our month and our days that help us just to enter the season without having to be at the mercy of everybody that wants us to say yes.
I'm super curious. So I think one of the most underrated challenging aspects of like why it's so busy is because there's I feel like a constant pressure, right? And that's whether that's the expectations of other people, whether that's the pressure of like realizing you need to say no, financial pressure of like, well, your kid really, really wants this thing, but you know, and for some people, like pressure is probably a lot easier to deal with. And they're just like, well, it's fine. You're getting this, you know? And for some people, there's like a lot of pressure. Like they want their kid to maybe experience what they didn't have or did have. I don't know. When I bring up like the idea of like, okay, how do you handle the pressure? How do you what do you think of? Is there like any tips that you'd give people, or is that something that you've thought through?
Oh yeah. And it's not the fun answer that everybody wants. And it's not the one where they're going to go, that's what I've been looking for forever. It's very mundane. And that is, I mean, especially on the gift side of things, we've come to a couple of different philosophies. First of all, we put a dollar amount on it and say, and we tell them, hey, this is how much we can spend on you this year. And sometimes it's more because it was a good year, and sometimes it's less. And we explain that to them. And then we let them have some say in, hey, here's how I would organize that budget money. And so this year, my son wants a PS5. Okay, and I look on every spot, and it's saying like $439 and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that is nowhere near what you are going to get.
Would you like to trade your next 5 Christmases?
Well, so then we offer them the option, say, hey, we're happy just to give you what we were going to spend on gifts. And if you want to supplement that and buy the PS5, we're happy for that to happen. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to say, hey, how do we tell you that we have some limitations, but before you to get what you are hoping for, and how do we do that creatively? It also teaches them maybe how to organize their own money a little bit so that they're not just going, oh, my kid wants that and I want them to smile. And so I'll spend anything. The second thing, philosophically, not only have we done a budget, but we at Christmas, at least, value experiences over stuff. And so one of the things we buy for the family every couple of years is a pass to like Discovery World, a family pass. Yeah. And the reason we do that is because it has a reciprocal with museums all over the country. So we can go down to Chicago and go to the Museum of Science and Industry and not have to pay anything, and the Field Museum. And so we try to do stuff that says, hey, we spent $120 for a family pass, but now when we go visit relatives in different areas, or if we want to go down to Chicago for a day, now we have options that provide us experiences. And, basketball games are experiences, all these different things that you can say, let's go do something together. Creates memories that stuff just can't be put in the place of.
I mean, I think that's so helpful, right? To like frame it within a mind. Like, I think specifically, like you mentioned the word, like you have a philosophy, right? So you have a guiding principle. And I think that's a big step. Like, hey, like, I mean, as much as we all love to just kind of like go through and whatever happens, you know what I mean? Like, I think that there is like a tremendous amount of freedom, and it almost like relieves some of the pressure, because it's like you've said, hey, this is how we decide. And so we don't need to feel the extra external pressures as much, maybe, when those other things happen. That's specifically like with kids and gifts. I know the other, probably maybe the other biggest pressure is like family, right? And maybe that's relatives, or maybe that's trying to figure out how do you visit everybody if you can, how do you, yeah, I mean, and maybe you have a crazy uncle. All right. Sorry, uncles. It always seems like it's an uncle, right? That's always how the phrase goes. But is there any like things you would advise where like, man, when that family pressure happens, like, here's how we process through it?
Yeah. Boy, it does happen, doesn't it? And I think the first thing that I would tell you is you can't make everybody happy all the time. But you can make everybody happy sometime. And so thinking more broadly than the Christmas season has been helpful to say, how do I say to somebody, hey, we're going to come down and visit you in October for a weekend, and we're going to hang out and spend some time, but we can't come down during December because now I get to use my job as a crutch for that one to say, I really don't have time, all these different things. But you can find your excuse. Yeah, you can find your excuse that's socially acceptable. But being able to say, hey, the goal is that we're together. If we can't do it exactly at the time of year that everybody else is, maybe that's not as big a deal if we continue to say that we value being together. And then know that you're going to get the sigh and the disappointed type of feeling from some folks who you aren't going to their place on Christmas Day. But in the end, you got to figure out, what am I choosing over that? If you're just choosing to sit on your couch by yourself, then maybe you got to realign your priorities. But if you've chosen, hey, our family is going to be together on this day, and we might do a whole lot of nothing, and that's the best thing we can do. But we're going to choose that, get in our rushing to somebody's house that may or may not be ready really for us, and that not everybody in our family is in their home space. We just have a priority to do something different. And so I would tell you, be ready for disappointment, but know what the win is. And then when you get in the middle of the win, take a minute and look around and go, hey, this is the win. We're all here. I mean, we might watch a movie in the same place, but there's noise in the kitchen and somebody's playing a video game and screaming at the screen, and that's a win. And I'm sitting here with my eggnog with the Christmas tree, and I'm very happy.
Yeah. Oh, I love just the reminder of like being able to choose what's best, and people may feel pressure about like, oh, having a hard time deciding, but I think that choosing to be with certain people, or choosing like that may not be what's best for your family. And I think that's okay, and it's okay sometimes if people are disappointed because, well, your job is to figure out what's best for our family, not necessarily what's best for them all the time,
Right. And it's a compliment that they're disappointed. If you can look at it like that, is that they actually wanted to spend time with you. It's the one that says, no, please don't go to Christmas at our house. That's when you start to worry.
Okay. So I brought up this topic of this podcast with this idea of how do we focus on God during this like super busy, challenging season. And we haven't talked about that at all. So,
so here we go.
Now, if that doesn't describe the busy season and how much there is to like talk about with different pressures and stuff, I don't know what it is, but let's dive into that. I mean, Christmas, people talk about it and they say, yeah, well, it's all about Jesus, right? And that's kind of the right answer if you follow Jesus, right? But something can be the right answer. And for those listening, I'm doing some air quotes here.
Yeah.
Plug for watching this on YouTube.
There you go. You can see the air quotes.
You can see the air quotes. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, that's the answer, but our life reflects anything but that.
Yep.
So I don't know, how do we, like in a world that loves the lights and the gifts and everything, and ourselves that love those things, how do we kind of refocus and remember Jesus?
Yeah. Can I give you an imperfect answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the imperfect answer I have is curiosity and tools. Not like tools that I build my house with. I know you should be, but curiosity is a really interesting thing. Is if you embed that in the fabric of your life and the people around you, then you're constantly asking questions, and questions open conversation, and then conversation becomes what we're focused on for a little bit of time. And so what we've tried to do is we actually in our house have a question of the day. And at Christmas time, we only do it in December, all the way through New Year's. And most of the time it's all about Christmas, but it's a balance between, hey, if you were going to spend Christmas in any famous building, what building would you spend it in? Okay. The answers you get out of that are completely crazy, from Five Star Forum to the Louvre Art Museum in Paris and, everywhere in between. And it creates conversation. But also, I mean, you get conversations like, hey, what do you think it was like to be in Bethlehem that day, even if you weren't Mary and Joseph? And just even saying, hey, we're going to ask a question that causes you to go, oh yeah, there was a Bethlehem. And oh yeah, they didn't have Wi-Fi or my phone or anything like that. And digging into, what would life be like? And then the follow-up question of that might be something like, why do you think God chose to send Jesus then and there? What was that? And getting some answers. And I don't know that you always have to just look and say, hey, baby Jesus in the manger, and we're going to have the nativity under the tree, and we all got to focus on Jesus. But it's saying, hey, how do we get curious about why and what and who and how does that affect us nowadays? And then I use the tools that are around us. I mean, church is a tool for that. We go to church. I mean, I am a pastor, yes. But I mean, we go to church together and then we talk about it later. And the key to going to church for me is not sitting in the pews, or the seats. That's the part that we have to do. The part that actually really is the gold is going out to lunch afterwards and not picking up food and taking it home so they can all go to their rooms and eat it. But actually like going to a McDonald's or going to a Mission barbecue or something like that. And when they're stuffing their faces with food and are happy, then I get to ask questions about what they experienced, and the conversation can't help but be about spiritual things because that's what we all just experienced. And so, and if a kid misses it because I've got teenagers and so they work and stuff like that, I'll I'll make a burger date with them. Hey, we're going to get a burger on Wednesday night. And they kind of have an understanding in our house is that I buy them a burger and the way they pay for that is talking. And so we just have conversations, and it's not all about God, but some of it is. And so we kind of walk back into it. Other families and people that I know, they take on things like Advent, and they walk through Advent, and they have, a Bible reading and things like that. And it just tends to help them refocus. But I'm more of the person to person conversational type stuff. And so just trying to make it part of the fabric of what we're doing that month so that it doesn't get lost.
I really appreciate the way that you kind of have acknowledged like how you connect, right? And somebody else might do it differently. And so I think that that's like a key thing, right? So if talking to people is like really challenging for you, and that's just like not naturally how you connect or even grow your curiosity or things like that. There are different avenues like Advent, like a reading plan or things like that. That are like daily and reminder, and like maybe that's how you really engage. But you're right. Like if you are a person that conversation drives your own interest in something, I know that's true for me, right? Where if I talk about something, that's when like I'll have more sparked interest, and I'll have more of like, I'm even more curious about this thing, even if I'm sharing about it from like a place of knowledge, right? Like, what's the next stage in that? And I'm super like, I love that you brought up curiosity, because I do think that people are wired differently. And so some people might never connect with the concept of like, I don't know, they just don't really care about like history. Right. And so like to talk about like, what's the historical significance of the census that occurred, right? That caused Mary and Joseph to go to Bethlehem. They might not care at all. Some people might hear that and be like, the Romans took a census? You know what I mean? And they're like, and they dive in and have that curiosity. And so know the things that you are naturally curious about. Like maybe for you, it is the like, I'm really curious about people stories. And so picturing Mary being pregnant on a donkey is like, that's the thing that makes me curious. Like, okay, well, what's it like to ride a donkey? Maybe I'm going to go this year and see if I can, with permission.
Going to the donkey farm at Christmas.
I go to
there
a donkey,
we go.
exactly. I don't know, but I love the idea of curiosity, and I think I take it a step further and kind of know what you're naturally curious about, and then how do you attach that to this story of Jesus?
And I think you and I have covered a section of how people are. The one that we haven't talked much about is the doer. They focus by doing. And I think this season gives us anywhere from Thanksgiving all the way through the New Year, there's hundreds of organizations that are saying, hey, we want to help make this a good Christmas for somebody else. And so the opportunity to serve and to volunteer and all those different things, that's also a way that a certain type of person who's built that way can really connect with the season. And if you're a follower, just understand why you're doing that. It's not like, I just want everybody to be happy. It's more like, hey, they're a creation of God, and I want them to feel loved this year. And part of doing that is playing my part.
How does that fit in? Because I think you're dead on. But how does that fit in with the like, it's a super busy season, right? And so then you're like, it feels like you're adding something. Is that going back to our previous, part of our conversation? Is that, well, I'm going to have to say no to something else that doesn't create that space?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And that's that's where you run into trouble with kids. So I'll just talk on the kids, is when you tell them, hey, we're going to go serve instead of go do this fun thing, you're not a popular person in the house. And yet it's noticing what they want to do and what makes them happy, but also sometimes what they need to do. And for us, going and serving like that might not be an every Christmas thing. But there might be something in Christmas, but it needs to happen consistently, because if we want a generation to grow up, not just in our house, but in others, understanding that it's not all about them, then they need to have experiences where it's not all about them. And so yeah, I think you're right on. You can just say yes to one more thing because you feel you gotta. But if you look at the year as a whole, and the people that you're trying to help grow in your house, or the person you're trying to be, if you look at the year as a whole, rather than let me just shove it into this time when everybody's got the attention there, then I think it's a whole lot more helpful on the schedule side of things.
This may go into your like curiosity point, but for the person who's, I don't know, they've been to church their whole life, we'll say. And so they've sat through 30 Christmas messages, or they've done Christmas all these times, right? And so they're very familiar with the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there, and so it's almost like, well, I know the story, so I almost don't have to focus on it, know? That type of mentality. Is there anything that you'd say, hey, well, here's how you can make it fresh. Here's a way that you could make this a new experience, or even if it's the same experience, give it some more meaning?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. That wasn't a question that we had talking about. So now I'm off the cuff. And so
perfect.
No, I think that there's a lot of different things you can do. Having been going to church my whole life, the story sometimes becomes wallpaper. It just becomes, hey, that's the story. And what I really want to pay attention to is all the fun new stuff that we've created around the story, so that I can have fun and this is a refreshing season for me. I think in the end, one of the first things you got to do is actually go back and read the story. Read the story out of the Gospels and say, wow, okay, what do I need to see here? And I believe that when we read God's word, when we read the Bible, that the Holy Spirit is part of that reading, that conversation. I know that sounds, super spiritual and whatever, but it is how I believe. And then I think the question is, why would he do that for me? What was the point of that? I mean, it seems like an awful lot of hardship. And really asking that question again, which is not an unusual question, but asking that question again. And then the last question in a conversation with God that I would ask is, what do you want me to see this year? Because I know that over time, reading the story in different seasons of my life, different characters have stuck out to me. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but okay, let me take it into another realm. There were some years where working life was hard, and we went to Disney World a couple of times as a family. And I remember one year that I loved all the Tigger stuff. Like, I just love Tigger. He's a full energy. He's bouncy. He's positive. And, I wanted to buy a shirt. So I did. And, you come back and you never wear it because nobody ever wears Disney stuff outside of Disney. But then there was another year that we went, and the only thing I was looking for was grumpy stuff. And it was just the, I don't know. It was just the stuff that resonated with me at that moment. And so when I look at the Christmas story, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to resonate necessarily with the experience of baby Jesus because that's just not my experience. But I wonder what it was like to be Joseph and have to put your wife to be who's pregnant on a donkey, because that's not comfortable, and go somewhere that you don't want to go because you don't actually like the government that's forcing you to go there, and you have no place to stay when it gets there. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion and all those different things. And I've had seasons in my life where I've been uncertain and confused and maybe don't know how to make all this work together. And he caught my attention. And then there's the shepherds that are like, I don't know, they're ADHD all over the place. I mean, they come flying into town like crazy people because they saw an angel. And imagine having experienced something that nobody is going to believe that you experienced and being like super joyful about it. And I've been in those seasons where I'm like, I have experienced something in my life that has been revolutionary and I don't know how to explain it. And all you people think I'm crazy. And so I resonated with the shepherds, and what did they do? They just did what came next. And so I think that reading through the story and trying to figure out what pops out to you and asking God to be a part of that, even if you're not a follower of Jesus and you're like, hey, there's a chance that there's a big guy out there. Why not ask? What harm can happen in asking, hey, point this out to me and let me see. So I don't know if what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah. I think, and it's something you touched on, I think the desire is huge. Because I think one of the things that, especially, and this is true for any busy season, right, is that you're almost in like a survival mode. You're almost in a go through and get it done type of mentality. It's like a checklist item. And until it becomes something you don't even care about checking off, right? That's kind of like how things progress. I think that maintaining a desire for there to be more, and sometimes it may not happen. Sometimes you may be like, I really want to get something out of the Christmas message. I really want to get something out of the Christmas story this year. And maybe it doesn't happen, I do think though, from what I've experienced, what I've heard people experiencing is that when you ask God to show you something, when you say like, hey, help me take something away. Help me, maybe it's learn something new. Maybe it's have a different understanding. More often than not, there's like okay, yeah, I'll show you something,
Are you ready to hear? I mean, that's the second thing.
And the other thing that I would say, once again, we're going to be fully dipping into our pastor hats here, is I do think the story changes and the experience changes when you make it about bringing somebody with you or sharing with somebody,
Yep.
And maybe that person is not ready to come into a church building. Totally fine. Maybe they're not even ready to watch something online. But, would they be open to you sharing about what this season means to you? Would they be open to you sharing about your tradition of reading the story and being like, man, it's really cool to like dive into the real, the story of what Christmas, maybe what it represents, or like what's the origin of why. And that's not, but Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
That's fine.
But, and we won't dive into that too much here.
That's a rabbit hole. I'm not sure we'll go down.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think you're right on that. Your perception changes when it has to come into contact with somebody else's perception and perspective. And when you talk about that, whether it's in church or in a coffee shop or, somewhere else, up in Wisconsin, it's not, on your front porch in December. We just don't do that. But
I don't know. Some people it is lawn chair, shorts, feet in the snow, snow boots.
That is fair. That is fair. But I think it affects the way that we think and the questions that we ask ourselves. And that's always going to spark newness in our view of the season. So.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you have a great relationship with somebody, even if they don't follow Jesus, their perspective on the story and the situation, I think will develop curiosity in you, right? You mentioned talking to your kids and like debriefing them like a message or like an experience or something that they had. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they ask questions or those conversations will spark something new. And when somebody's like, oh, why would God care? That's, that maybe you haven't asked yourself that question,
Well, true. Or maybe you're afraid to, because I think that some people come into Christmas and go, hey, I know this is good news for a lot of people, but I don't know how God looks at me. And so I don't know that I'm ready to engage with that right now.
Yeah. Okay. So last question for you, Brodie.
Sure.
How, like we've talked a little bit about like, just like the bright lights and like, how do you stay focused and things like that. Is there any, like, if we get super practical, is there any like specific things you're like, hey, you know what? Really try this specific thing. Maybe it's a specific reading plan. Maybe it's a daily like refresher or reminder that you go through. Is there anything that comes to mind for those things?
From a spiritual perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most people, so I'm gonna give a couple of things that hopefully will cover the gamut of people. It might not everything cover every person. I think most people come from a tradition of religion of some sort, whether it's Catholic, Lutheran, or completely not, but they've developed traditions around the season. And I would tell you, lean into those traditions from a spiritual side of things. If it's Advent, then lean in a little bit more and reconnect yourself with some of that and make it so you're not just, like you said before, checking off the box, like, hey, got it done, all set. Now I can go do the rest of my life. But actually just setting aside a few moments. And some people think that, hey, if I'm going to set aside time to do this, it's got to be an hour of sitting in darkness and silence. And I have to, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Well, if that works for you, then I'm in a world of hurt because that doesn't work for me. A lot of times it happens while I'm in a car or I'm on a walk, and it's 5 to 10 minute pieces of things. So what I would tell you is lean into some of those traditions and don't neglect the things that are built into you as a human. Us as humans are built for story. We're hardwired for it. And so the more we can engage with stories of things that impact us, the more likely we are to like live into thinking about stuff. And the second is music. We are hardwired for music. Maybe not singing. I'm not hardwired for singing, but music we are hardwired for. And this season, there's tons of different things that even if you just said, "Hey, I'm going to listen to a couple of different songs throughout the week," and I'm not going to just listen to the tune and get creative with that, but I'm going to listen to the words and what do those words say. And so I think coming down into that type of thing is probably the most intensely practical, is just setting aside time, figuring out maybe what some traditions are that you could lean into, some rhythms of, can you encounter stories of people who would be inspiring as far as what Christmas is all about, whether it's from a spiritual perspective or a investment in others type of perspective. And then music, really consider what that music might be saying. Those are some simple things that we can do all sorts of places. But I think just setting aside a little bit of time and saying, "Hey, I'm going to make this a little bit different." If you do that every year, year over year, in a couple of years, you'll realize that your Christmas is radically different than it used to be.
You know, I know that this is going to start off sounding counterintuitive, but I really do think that you carve out the space for these types of moments, right? And you're busy and you're crazy busy. But I do think that they give you like the emotional and the spiritual like lift, you know, and then all of a sudden your interactions with other people, your interactions with your family, your capacity to handle extra chaos, it goes up. And it sounds counterintuitive that you like take more time to do these things. How do you fix your busy schedule? Well, set aside time, you know, but add to it. But when you do it in a way that's like, I don't know, just like growing your connection with God in a way that like helps you feel refreshed, helps you feel more connected, and like, I'll call it like spiritual bandwidth or emotional bandwidth. It just increases. And then all of a sudden you're a little bit less short. Your anger is a little bit less quick to happen. Which even if it's just those two things, like those can go a tremendous amount towards easing relationships, work conflicts, so many different elements. And I think that's true not just in the Christmas season, but really in any busy season.
Yeah, I would tell you you're right. And I think that if you reverse it and say, hey, the time and the space gives you more capacity to be this, the inverse of that is, hey, if you're experiencing that your internal temperature is rising, and that you're angry quicker, and that you're disappointed or sad or to a higher degree than normal, then maybe those are the flags that are saying, hey, it's time to create some space. You need some margin, and you need to invest in yourself a little bit that way so that you can be more of the person that you want to be.
Perfect. That's so great. Thank you, Brodie. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for chatting with me.
Thanks.
It's just kind of like, it's interesting because it's like slightly challenging, but it's also kind of a fun, like, curious conversation. So
yeah, no, I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, that was my conversation with Brodie, and I want to encourage you to head to the show notes or the description of this video, where we will send you a free resource about how to handle the stress of the Christmas season. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.